Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. If you want to learn how to support the channel and its mission to normalize atheism and deconversion, stay tuned to the end of the video. Welcome to the Deconverter's Bible Study. Today I'm continuing on the Bible study When God Kills, one of three that I'm doing. And we are looking at Numbers 25, where God kills 24,000 people for having sex with the wrong people. Let's head over to Numbers 25 and take a look at it. So this whole idea, the setup of this is, Israel's kind of wandering around in the wilderness, and they're wandering near the tribe of Moab. And so Israel's camping down, and that's kind of the setup for the story. So here's the way the story reads. And the text says, while Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with Moabite women, who invited them to the sacrifices to their gods. The people ate the sacrificed meal and bowed down before these gods. So Israel yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger was burned against them. So at this point in the story, basically we go back in time a little bit to the giving of the Ten Commandments. We remember that God has this insecurity complex about other gods because he basically admits to the existence of other gods and basically is too insecure in himself to have people worship other gods. He basically says, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt and all that jazz. You shall have no other gods before me. In other words, he has to take preeminence. He has to be the big dog. And if he doesn't have the capacity to allow other people to have other relationships with other gods, that just makes him mad. Okay, so you're in this position where, they have agreed to this as part of the covenant, although it might be argued that Yahweh kind of forced the covenant upon them. It was either that or starve to death in the wilderness. So, there is some good case when you look at the overall story of Yahweh being kind of a guy that forces himself upon his people or else kind of thing. And there's definitely an or else through all the character of Yahweh because he has a real bad tendency, as we've demonstrated in this series many, many times, to just kill people if he doesn't, like what they do. So this is no different cases. In this particular case, there's Israelite men who see these Moabite women and say, hey, looking good, and they head over there, they have sacrificial meal, they bow down before their gods, and part of ancient pagan worship is definitely, sexual activities and practices, and so that's going on as well, although it's not stated, other than they committed sexual immorality with women. And so that kind of is the setup in the situation. So what does God, Yahweh, do about it? It says, well, then the passage says, then the Lord said to Moses, take all the leaders of these people, kill them, and expose them in broad daylight before the Lord, so that the Lord's fierce anger may turn away from Israel. Here's where I have a real problem, once again, with the justice of God, and it's his actions like this that create that problem. I mean, throughout the Old Testament law and scriptures, you have this high standard of sex to the point of death, okay? You won't commit adultery. Okay, well, adultery, what is the punishment for adultery? Death, okay? Homosexuality, what's the punishment for that? Death. These are two sexual crimes committed by consensual people that apparently are so heinous that God thinks that the death penalty is involved here if you have sex with the wrong person. If you don't have sex with the right person, you end up dead. And one of the things here that is pretty clearly explained is the other death penalty offense, at least according to God, is having sex outside the tribe. Which, when you look at this whole thing, the adultery, the homosexuality, and in this case, where God is killing people for having sex with women of another tribe, what are we trying to do here? Yahweh's ultimate goal then is to protect men's rights to the women that are their property, number one. The adultery thing is very much about making sure that whatever child is produced by the woman belongs to the man who is married to them. It's why I think marriage is really very, I don't use this word often, but it's very patriarchal. But you also have the element in here with the homosexuality. We want to make sure we keep producing children for the tribe. We want to make sure that the woman that's producing children is producing children for a particular man to make sure that his genetics is going forward, although they wouldn't have put it that way. And now you have this incident. So what is this trying to do? It's trying to reinforce the idea of tribalism, that you don't have children outside the tribe, which is kind of a tragedy thing, because when you look at people groups, okay, and they may have been warring people groups, there's two things that usually cause a diminishing of hostilities between two people groups. Number one is trade. When you start to trade stuff with each other, you become not so much dependent on each other, but life is better without war. Okay, you're willfully trading back and forth, and so that leads to a lot more peace. And so when people yell about trade agreements in life, I kind of go, yeah, whatever, dude. This is something that will lead to peace between the two countries, and it leads to an exchange of information, ideas that can transform the culture of both countries. Another part of that cultural exchange, though, is you have a young man in one tribe sees a young woman in the other tribe, and they fall in love, and they get married, and they start producing kids. So then the kids become that bridge. And so there's this idea. So Yahweh doesn't like that. He wants his people to be exclusively his people, and he wants them to not engage in that type of activity. Now, of course, there's idolatry here involved, the sacrificial meal and the bowing down to the other gods, but that's really Yahweh's problem. Yahweh seems to have a problem with jealousy. He's very human in that regard, and he views the other gods as kind of competition, and he doesn't like the competition. He can't just prove himself to be the better God. He has to force his people to serve him or else. He orders these leaders of these people that are engaged in this and engaged in the sexual immorality with the Moabite women to be put to death. Okay, and they have yoked themselves to Baal of Peor. The order begins to go out and it gets to be executed. And so then an Israelite man brought into camp a Midianite woman. Okay, so this is a particular incident. It switches to this, okay, where this Israelite sees this Moabite woman, hey, come back to my place. And she agrees, and they head back to his place. And based on the way the story reads and the action that this man will take, okay, I think the man and the woman were kind of doing the dirty, okay, at that moment. This is the way it reads. And an Israelite man brought into the camp a Midianite woman right before the eyes of Moses and the whole assembly of Israel, while they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw this, he left the assembly, took a spear in his hand, and followed the Israelite to his tent, and drove the spear through both of them, right through the Israelite man and into the woman's stomach. Then the plague against the Israelites was stopped, but those who died of the plague numbered 24,000. Okay? So there's a plague going on because of this, which isn't said when it started, but all of a sudden there's this plague in Israel, okay? And so the impression you get is this man took this woman back to his tent, and they start engaging in sexual intercourse, and this guy comes into their tent, drives the spear through the guy and into the woman's stomach, and at that moment, the plague stops. How they do that, I don't know. And the story isn't all that clear about that particular part. But here's the point. Why is it a death penalty offense to have consensual sexual activity with another person if that person isn't the right tribe, isn't the right religion? And it is this mentality that begins to start in any believer of the Old Testament, but also the New. the basis for a lot of the sexual immorality, the fornication, Paul's statements against idolatry in 1 Corinthians, is this idea that's really here in Numbers. But somehow, if you have sex with the wrong person, or you're not married, or it's some sort of LGBTQ sexual activity, God has a real problem with it. Okay? He has a real problem with it. And to the point that he will kill people over it. It's almost like, because, God can see everything, there's only a certain kind of porn that he wants to watch. Okay? And anything else just doesn't appeal to him, so he wants it off the channel. And I don't, as a person who kind of looks at sexual activity a little bit more objectively these days, I get back in the ancient world, it was difficult. There's no paternity test, so I understand why there wanted to be some sort of system to make sure that if you're passing on your genetics, although they wouldn't have put it that way, that the child is yours. So I get that part. But why would it be a death penalty offense if you catch your woman with some other dude? And why is this consensual sexual activity viewed by God as something so evil that it deserves death? And this is where the justice of God just escapes me at this point. The justice of Yahweh is out the window at this point. It's just he's pissed off and he's jealous and he doesn't like what's going on, and how dare you worship another God besides me? How dare you have a meal with people? How dare you have some cultural exchange that might lead to peace between the two peoples? Jeez. How dare you fall in love with another group of people that worship a different God than me? It's like, it's this arrogant, prideful jealousy that Yahweh God has. And we take, Eliezer here, who Eliezer the priest, son of Aaron the priest, grabs his javelin and kills two people for having consensual intercourse, probably. Because the way it reads, it's like it went right through the guy's back and right into her stomach, which tells me that they were probably horizontal. And at that moment, the plague stops. And what gets worse is what happens in the rest of the story. Okay, up to that point, the plague has claimed 24,000 people because they decided to have sex with Moabite women. Consensual sex with Moabite women is a death penalty offense. And they killed all the leaders of this group. They hang them up before the congregation. This plague is wiping out the rest of them. This guy takes this Moabite woman to his tent in a consensual sexual act, and somehow God is pissed off about it, to the point that he thinks it's a good idea to have two people killed over this. Verse 10 says, "And the Lord said to Moses, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, has turned the anger away from the Israelites. Since he was zealous for my honor among them as I am, I did not put an end to them in my zeal. Therefore, tell him I am making my covenant of peace with him. He and his descendants will have a covenant of lasting priesthood, because he was zealous for the honor of God and made atonement for the Israelites." Okay, so this guy, this Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, Aaron's his grandfather, gets a Benny for doing this. He killed two people for God's sake, and so God says, "Hey, I didn't have to kill these two people. Thanks, pal," and gives them a bonus. "You're going to be a priest in my house forever." And of course, we're going to have to list off the victims of God here, because in verse 14 it says, "The name of the Israelite who was killed with the Midianite woman is Zimri, son of Salu, leader of the Simonite family. And the name of the Midianite woman who was put to death was Cosbi, daughter of Zur, the tribal chief of the Midianite family." Talk about creating an intertribal incident that will lead probably to war. And, given how Yahweh goes to war, the eradication of the Moabites. And then it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, treat the Midianites as enemies and kill them. Treat They treated you as enemies when they deceived you in the Peoria incident following the sister of Cosby, the daughter of the Midianite leader, the woman who was killed when the plane came as a result of that incident. In other words, because these Moabite women have seduced you and have brought you down, they now are your enemies. And so we're going to go to war over sex. How is this God omniscient? How is this God a moral standard for anything at this point? I mean, I'm not talking just about this story, but all the rest of the stories. How is God here some kind of consistent in any way? He literally gets pissed off about this to the point where he's willing to go to war over consensual sexual activity with another tribe. Now, here's the funny part, given the law. If these Moabite women were on a slave auction block and some Israelite men had bought them off the block, right? And they follow the procedures, to make sure they're clean. In other words, these women sit around for 3 or 4 months to make sure they're A, not pregnant, and B, don't have any diseases. These Israelite men would have been able to take these Moabite women, these Midianite women, or whoever women, to the tent, have sex with them, have children with them, and there would be no problem if they were slaves. But because it was a consensual activity between two groups of people from different tribes, that becomes the problem, that they both agree to it. You can't, with Yahweh, you can't really have a lot of fun, okay? And for me, Yahweh's real problem is he doesn't have any better moral ideas. I look at the modern day, and we have some modern advantages in birth control in particular, and we, of course, have genetic testing to determine parentage of children, and that can be very valuable if we want to know something is about the genetic conditions that child might have. And so is all of that custom necessary anymore? I don't think it is. I don't even think marriage is really necessary anymore. It's a legal binding contract. That's all it really is. And if it has any advantage, it should be to protect children, the children that are produced by the relationship. But it doesn't change the fact that this is God killing people because he's jealous about his position. He's insecure about his position as God. So, he can't just stand in his own security, stand in his own power. He has the attitude of this paranoid, tyrannical dictator. And when somebody else is getting homage or praise or whatever, he loses it. And in this case, you got about, 24,000 men, probably some of the women, let's say it's 50-50, 12,000 men, 12,000 women of the Moabite side. And Yahweh is willing to not only kill them, but reward a dude who killed 2 of them. Thank you, Phinehas, son of Eleazar. And on top of that, create basically an intertribal incident that leads to war. All over the fact that he doesn't like the idea of consensual sex between the tribes, period. He escalates this way beyond what it needs to be, even by the standards of the time. If a king went to war because, those people went over and had a good time with this other tribe that I don't like, well, that's wrong. Kill them for going over there and betraying me, and let's go to war. Wow, that escalated quickly, didn't it? And that's the kind of tyrannical nonsense that gets tribes into trouble. And, there could have been this peaceful coexistence, exchange of people, exchange of ideas, exchange of goods and services that would have led to peace and prosperity for both nations. Because the truth of the matter is the conquest of Canaan was actually probably not good for the Israelites because they destroyed a lot of economic, social, political opportunity because they just chose to be a conquering people that just wiped other people out, genocided them out of existence. And here we have a God who is supposedly their leader, ordering a war, ordering the death and execution of people for consensual sexual activity. Bottom line. Oh, but they worship those gods. Yes, thus admitting that those gods existed to Yahweh. If they didn't really existed, he wouldn't have had a problem with it. Well, they're not being loyal to me. So they deserve death? See, this ancient God Yahweh, he's kind of just a dick. I just don't, I'm sorry, I don't understand this anymore. Once you take the scales, the rose-colored glasses off that you're taught and indoctrinated with when you're a child or as you get older or when you join the faith of Christianity, once you start looking at this as ancient literature, you begin to realize that the entirety of the Bible seems to be written with the villain being portrayed as the good guy, and he's not. Don't get me wrong, it's a clever literary device that some other authors have used where you have this character that always looks like, oh, he's the good guy, until you realize all the behind the scenes BS that character does. In this case with Yahweh, though, he doesn't do shit behind the scene. He does it in front of everybody. And then everybody says, oh, yeah, but he was just and good to do so. That's the indoctrination. There's no justice here. There is no way that you would go into a court of law in the Western world today, and if a guy said, my wife had sex with that other dude, they both need to be killed, that would fly. People would go, it just had sex. Okay, they did a normal human activity, and it was consensual. What is your, yeah, adultery is not a good thing, but what's your problem? That certainly doesn't give you death penalty in the Western world. We've grown up since Yahweh God, and apparently Yahweh God isn't all that grown up. He doesn't have a very good standard of justice, and this story illustrates it. I mean, it's an interesting story. You can look it up for yourself. Numbers 25 is an interesting read, along with the context around it. So I encourage you to read it and give me your comments below. I'd appreciate it. That's part of this Bible study is your comments. So any thoughts, ideas you have, roll them by me, and I'm glad to entertain them. Thanks for stopping by. Every like, share, and subscribe is appreciated, as well as every comment, because it all helps me with the YouTube algorithm, the only God I can really think that actually exists. There's a number of ways to support the channel. My PayPal link is in the description. You can do super thanks, super likes, all that other stuff. But the best way that you can support the channel is become a member, become a citizen of the Rabyd Nation. It only costs $2 a month, and it really goes a long way to helping me do the videos I like to do without having to worry so much about the YouTube algorithm. And every time I get a new member, that kind of eases that pressure. So thanks once again for every member. I want to just give a shout out to my members, to my citizens, to my Rabyd citizens, to my Tribunes. Thank you guys. You guys are awesome. You really help me move forward with what I'm trying to do with the channel, normalizing atheism and deconversion. Thank you very much. And as always, live your best life. You only get one go around, and then it's over. So make sure you're taking all your time, money, and opportunities and spending them on yourself and the people you love and care for, and to make this a better world. And don't waste them on the trappings of religion and faith. That's a dead end. I speak from experience. And you'll be much happier if you do. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you next time.